All right, so I hit the limits of my understanding of theology and psychology here a little bit. I gave myself a splitting headache to get to this information or understanding and so on, so I hope you appreciate it. Uh, um, I'll just go with the information and then you can judge for yourself, but it's a very ow, my head kind of thing. If it gives you a headache, don't worry, it's giving me a headache right now. But I think it might be worth a mention. So, there's a cooperative model of God determines what we want to do and therefore what we do, um, both our will and His will, kind of Calvinist sort of uh, relationship between God being all powerful and our own free will. And then there's a sort of what's called an apophatic paradox, or just paradox model of being for or against God's will in unknown mechanisms, which is either for God's will or against God's will, basically, either or. Um, Now, Ian McGilchrist, or Ian McGilchrist, uh, wrote a book called The Master and His Emissary, and I've listened to some of his talks about the topic. And basically, the left brain is either or and mechanistic and goal seeking, like I'm going to hunt for food, while the right brain is both and it's holistic and it's more about awareness of potential predators. Like those three for the left brain and those three for the right brain. Now, I decided that this is going to explain free will and God being all powerful. So it's a combination of we do what God wants, even when it's evil, in a sense. Um, and we do what God wants when we do good as well. But it's also a matter of we go against God's will when we do evil, and we go with God's will when we do good. Um, and that's a very left and right brain sort of way of thinking about it. And that would explain why Calvinism, which is a very rational uh, denomination in essence, um, uh, or actually, no, that doesn't make sense because Calvinism would be the I both and. Um, but it has to spell it out basically. I almost view the different denominations as going against the grain of common problems of people that go to those denominations or something. But Calvinism is a both and free will and God's sovereignty, as they call it, or God being all powerful for your will. And that's what makes it monstrous when God sends you to hell. So I'll get into what I actually think goes on with that one and why I'm what I call a delayed universalist. So purgatory exists and then heaven, no permanent hell, but you're not going to get away with whatever bad things you do, and God's going to make sure you're cleansed completely. You know, and you can be beyond human redemption. They can execute you with the death penalty, and you deserve it. And then God will pick up the pieces or break you further, and then pick up all the pieces and put them back together in a better way, going towards infinity or forever and ever and more forever. Um, After you're put back together the right way. Um, so it's not a you go to hell or you go to heaven kind of thing. It's more of a purgatory and then heaven, and the length of time and amount purgatory sucks is going to be related to how evil you were at your heart and core in this life, basically. And this does rely on a certain degree of evil is non existence itself kind of approach, life and death, life being good, death being evil, functionality versus dysfunctionality, and so on, and so on. There's even, okay, now going back to the left brain and right brain, kind of both and either or for free will and God's all powerfulness, there's even nested in it, I just realized, free will as a bit of goal seeking and being aware of predators equal, oh, God's judging me and he's out there kind of approach. And that's a very left brain and then right brain kind of way of thinking of things. If free will emphasis equals goal seeking and awareness of something big and dangerous out there, so to speak, like Aslan, I've devoured empires and men and women and civilizations and so on. He's good but not harmless. He's dangerous but he's good. Then equals God all powerful. Then the left brain emphasis, that explains some of the Christian emphasis on my will equals bad and God's will equals good. Because there's a certain dysfunctionality towards chasing after a good to the exclusion of maintenance of other goods. Now, to break it down a little bit, the left brain emphasis is where autism and schizophrenia take place. And the left brain is a very logic and rationality kind of either or hemisphere, the left brain. And the right brain is what's called fuzzy logic, or it tolerates paradoxes that are unexplainable, but they just kind of, things work out anyways if you just let it just be like a mystery. The right brain can handle that part. And that explains why so many midwits, or like 110 IQ, slightly above average kind of people, where the autism range is, are atheists and socialists, because they're utilitarian, materialist, mechanistic, and normal people are more like folk wisdom and person-to-person relationality or relations, understanding, and so on. So that's a breakdown of some of the dimensions and so on. And my, I guess, metaphysics of redemption in the afterlife and so on. But that's kind of my breakdown of free will versus God's being all powerful and so on. And I really do believe that you can be beyond human redemption, but God will save your soul anyways, eventually, after breaking you apart and like liquidating, literally, well, not literally, but like metaphysically or metaphorically, your soul until it's only the good parts. And I guess I would technically have to say that even a child predator, genocidal psychopath has something good in them. I would have to, like, I'm not saying a human can see it, but there's bound to be something in everyone that's savable on some level, is my theology. Otherwise, it would make God to be a monster, basically, who's condemning you to hell for what you did that he made you do or something, right? Like, it's like, I can't accept that. That would make God the monster. That would make God the monster. So God is saying basically, if all else fails, you can blame it on me, like the Bare Naked Lady song, in a sense. He's taking ultimate responsibility, but you're taking part of the responsibility on top of that, or your own subsidiary responsibility. And he's going to break you down until you're only the golden part of you is still there. And then he'll start adding infinity to you, and so on. And then I mentioned how non-existence is evil and existence is good, and so on. This is a traditional Thomas Aquinas style belief structure, basically. Life is good, death is bad. That's a common human experience. It's only when you're suffering and you think it's worse than non-existence and not feeling anything that you might consider death as a positive, because you're feeling so bad. But the general trend is God is just refining you and testing you, and he'll bring you out of the problems eventually, and just keep struggling, and it'll be okay in the end. You have a certain duty to live on and persevere and struggle on and so on as best as you can, and so on. And he's not going to beat you up too much over failing to do so. So don't panic about that. But at the same time, he's going to be slightly disappointed in you in a sense. And that's going to be part of what he refines and breaks down in that failure to persevere in the struggles and so on. So that answers the self-deletion, going to hell or heaven question. It lets, and basically, like I said, a human doesn't have to see the good in someone. So there might be someone who's so awful, literally 0 people out of all 8.5 billion of us cannot see any good in them whatsoever. God will see what is good in them, because he knows everything. He made them. He knows what he made them. And I'm sure that God made something good in everyone on some level, somewhere, somehow, that even if no human can see, God can. And then he's going to build them up off of that. No matter if it's microscopic or like an atom or like a quark or gluon of goodness instead of the usual pound or kilogram of goodness. He's going to build them up off of that core once he breaks down and burns away all the inadequacies and so on. So that's my delayed universalism. So that's my theology. That's my approach to free will and God being all-powerful. That's why I'm a universalist, because I don't like the idea of God making you do evil and then sending you to hell. I don't think you don't have I don't agree that you don't have responsibility because God made you do it, but I also don't agree that God doesn't have responsibility to save you because he made you do it. Just because he's God, basically. I don't think God has I still don't think, even if I think there's a relationship between God being all-powerful and good and perfectly good and so on, I don't think God would be just in sending you to hell for doing what he made you do, basically, on some level. But I think you should also approach it, in a sense, as well as God made you do it, as I chose to do it. And the exact emphasis on whether or not it's one or the other is, in fact, a very autism or normie, schizophrenic or psychopath kind of relationship that you would emphasize or choose based on your predisposition, with a coloring based on experience. So it seems true for you, but this is the way I would explain how all of it combines based on certain characteristics and so on in different situations for different people in their viewpoint. So it's trying to be a total theory of free will and God's all-powerfulness and who relates to which version, cooperative or paradox, and so on. And which one they fall into, self-sorting and so on. It's not meant to be a sort of like, oh, don't worry, you only were a predator on 2 children, not 20, so therefore you're in the clear. It's not meant to be a sort of like you insulted someone who punched you, therefore you're going to hell either. It's sort of a mechanistic interpretation of the situation, because I'm a very autistic and left brain and maybe even schizophrenic type of person. And this is just me trying to puzzle it out in a way that I can actually rationally, logically hold on to, based on E. McGilchrist, based on Jordan Peterson, and based on the theology that I've actually listened to quite heavily for some time, trying to become a Christian properly and so on. I don't know what knock-on effects of metaphysics or philosophy or whatever that might come from this, but the watchword is Heraclitus, tension of the opposites in some sense, and that's like the origin of my understanding of the free will versus God's sovereignty or being all powerful in relation to left brain, right brain kind of dynamics of thinking either or and both and. And why people say you can go against God's will and that's sin, and then you can go for God's will and that's God's will and your will. So there's like a 25% sin factor and a 75% follow God's will factor. But that last 25-75% thing isn't like a breakdown of the actual definite going against or for God's will kind of thing. It's just a rough. It's a very simplistic explanation for our behaviors. If you have to boil down all the weird things I just said, all the complicated things I just said, into a simple statement. And I've got a headache. I've got a massive splitting headache thinking about God here. I've hit the limit of my understanding. I think I'm done with these videos, this existential crisis guide and toolkit. I've got a bibliography and I've got a set of statements that'll are rules to go by, as far as I can tell, for if you study Christianity, then these are kind of like the probable guidelines to go by, and just assume that these are correct, more or less, kind of things, in the bibliography of my influences and inspirations and so on. So those are the next 2 videos, and we will add.